Hello there, I am Carolita Edwards, and this is Focus on GRA. This week, we will tell you about the type of VAT registration, dealer's general license, and finally, we will also remind you about the process for obtaining a tender certificate of compliance. Focus on GRA begins now.
We want the best facilities that this country could ever see, the best infrastructure and public utility, the best education for children in this country, the best health services and public security. But if we want to see such development in every community, then we must be fair and pay we full share of taxes and duty. Want proper bridges and coca, pay your tax. Better roads and safer, pay your tax. Better electric power, pay your tax. Clear potable water, pay your tax. Better schools and teacher, pay your tax. Better nurses and doctor, pay your tax. Better police and soldier, pay your tax. For a better Guyana, pay your tax.
An individual that carries on a taxable activity and is not registered is required to be registered for value-added tax once they meet any of the criteria as set out in Section 11 of the Value-Added Tax Act, Chapter 8105. Ms. Marcia Aris tells us about the type of VAT registrations.
In keeping with Section 6 of the Value-Added Tax Act, Chapter 8105, a taxable activity is one which is carried on continuously or regularly by a person in Guyana for consideration, whether or not for profit. There are two types of VAT registration. They are mandatory and voluntary registration. An individual or company qualify for mandatory registration if they are making taxable supplies, the total value of which equals or exceeds 15 million Ghana dollars at the end of any period of 12 or fewer months, or has reasonable grounds to expect that their taxable supplies will equal or exceed $15 million at the beginning of any period of 12 months. On the other hand, an individual or company who makes or intends to make taxable supplies but is not required to apply for registration because the value of the supplies is below 15 million Ghana dollars may apply for voluntary registration. Ms. Lovina Walren, Assistant Commissioner, VAT Audit and Enforcement, explains this category of registration.
You may not meet the actual requirements, but you're trading in taxable supplies. You can still register. The Act provides for voluntary registration. That's the persons who are trading below the threshold. But for those persons, they must meet certain requirements. So key to note, for the other set of taxpayers, the only requirement is the threshold. Taxable supplies and threshold. But for voluntary, you can be doing taxable supplies, you don't meet the threshold, but you have to satisfy requirements. One of the requirements, you must have a fixed place of business. The next requirement is that you must be trading in taxable supply. And the third one, you must have a proper accounting system. So you must have adequate books and records in place already with your normal trade. And that is because, of course, VAT is a policing tax, and it's a tax collected on behalf of states. So record keeping is very critical to VAT.
In addition to the aforementioned, there are individuals or companies that are required by law to register for value-added tax irrespective of their turnover. Ms. Waldron tells us more.
Something to note, apart from the normal industry, there are other persons required to register too. So a promoter of public entertainment, even if, and in their case, they're not tied to the $50 million threshold or voluntary registration. They must register once they're providing any activity that's considered public entertainment, right? So even if it's a one-off activity, in their case, they're required to register. State agencies also required to register or agency the state once they're providing taxable activities within their services. So, for example, even though under the Ministry of Infrastructure you have, let's say you have the Mara Harbor Bridge, but in this case they do the asphalt plant, they're required to register for VAT because that as the actual asphalt plant is not necessarily consistent with their normal source of operations. It's a taxable activity within. So that they're required to register, pay it, to charge and remit VAT. So not because some people think because I'm an agent of the state or a state agency, you're not required. No, the legislation have provision. So for actual regulatory functions by the agency, no, that will not be taxable. But if they have any other services or activities that are deemed taxable, they're also required. And they're not tied to state agency like the promoters are not tied to a specific threshold. So even if the activity is in a given year, $5 million, they're still required to register because the threshold is not tied to them.
It must be noted that the process for registering for value-added tax with the Guyana Revenue Authority is a simple one. Ms. Waldron explains this process.
So we actually have registration forms, VAT registration forms. So you can come into the tax authority and uplift VAT registration forms to apply for VAT registration, and along with your supporting documents, such as your business registration, if it's a company, articles of incorporation, the whole package, along with the thing I should point out, the more documentation you actually support, it helps to speed up the process in terms of processing the application. So if you have information with regards to, or any proof of starting the activity, that would be beneficial to you. So you don't necessarily have to wait until our officers come to you. Project proposals, all that could be, all that could be part of your submission of your application if you wish. But currently, the main thing is the application along with your business registration details and ownership, to prove those sort of information. Something to note though, it's key to note though that even if the business hasn't registered with the business registry, they can still register for VAT. Unlike the other act, there's no barrier. So even if we find someone trading and they haven't even registered the business registry, we don't necessarily have to wait until you're officially registered for us to register you for VAT. All right. Something else I would like to point out and encourage persons to come out and register before we come to you.
Once registered, a VAT registrant is obligated to do the following: file returns, charge, collect, and remit VAT, display a certificate of registration in a noticeable place, notify the Commissioner General within 15 days of any changes made to the business, and maintain proper books and records. Ms. Waldron outlines some of the consequences that a person can face if they fail to register for VAT when they are required to do so.
Once we find that you should have been registered, we're not only going to register you currently, but in terms of immediate effective date, but we actually would backdate you as far as even 5 and so years back if we find that you were trading in taxable supplies above the threshold for all those years. Because, level play field. We got to be fair to the other persons who are compliant with the law. So some people think they're getting away with it by, we don't have time with GRA, not coming in, not registering. But you might have been getting away just for a time, because when we backdate the registration, unfortunately, even though you haven't charged VAT all those years because you weren't registered, so you couldn't charge, but you weren't registered, the legislation provides for you to remit VAT on that sales that you would have earned. So we have a lot of people who are crying now that, oh my gosh, we didn't know, we weren't registered. So why do we have to pay the law? Because of a level play field. So not because you weren't registered, it's an excuse. And of course, getting into any business, you should try to find out as much as possible what legislation in any country that would govern your business, because at the end of the day, ignorance of the law is no excuse. I just want to urge persons to come in, continue registering any of the offices, not only a GR, not at our main Camp Street office, a GRA here, but all our branch offices. Send in your applications, get registered before we come and register you.
If you are a dealer in motor vehicle, that is, you are in the business of importing and selling motor vehicles, you are required to obtain a dealer's general license from the Guyana Revenue Authority. This is in accordance with Section 201(1) of the Motor Vehicle and Road Traffic Act, Chapter 5102. Here's more. An individual applying for a dealer's general license must submit a written request to the Senior Manager, License Revenue Office, located at 200-201 Camp Street, South Comminsburg, and must complete an application form which must include the following information: type of vehicles, the number of motor vehicles that will be imported annually, tax identification number, the number of trade plates the applicant is desirous of having, whether the business will be a sole trader, partnership, or a company. Once issued with the dealer's general license, the applicant will be allowed to use not more than 4 trade plates. They will also be required to submit their tax returns in keeping with Section 60 of the Income Tax Act, Chapter 8101, and pay quarterly advance tax. The due date for the payment of quarterly advance tax by an individual is April 1st, July 1st, October 1st, and December 31st, while for a company, it is March 15, June 15, September 15, and December 15. The annual fee for a dealer's general license is $150,000, while each trade plate costs $15,000. The license is valid for 1 calendar year, commencing 1st of January and ending 31st of December. One of the criteria for any person who wishes to qualify for a government contract is obtaining a tender compliance certificate from the Guyana Revenue Authority. Tiffany Rodius tells us about this certificate of compliance.
A tender compliance certificate is issued by the Guyana Revenue Authority to a contractor or supplier who wishes to qualify or tender for government contracts in accordance with Section 5 of the Procurement Act, Chapter 7 to 305. Contractors or suppliers who fail to obtain a tender compliance certificate may be denied a contract because of failure to fulfill one of the pre-qualification criteria of procuring entities. There are 3 categories of tender certificate of compliance issued by the GRA. These are temporary, standard, and trusted trader. Ms. Nathalie Moore, Manager of Tax Compliance and Enforcement, tells us what an applicant for a tender compliance certificate should know before making an application to the GRA.
It is important to note when you are applying for a tender compliance that we are going to check all the tax types that you are registered for. We are going to check your status for the past 8 years. We want to see that all your returns have been submitted for the past 8 years.
When applying for a tender compliance certificate, it is expected that the applicant is tax compliant. However, this is not always the case. The Guyana Revenue Authority has put systems in place for such individuals. A taxpayer that has failed to file all required returns and pay or make satisfactory arrangements with the Commissioner General to pay all outstanding taxes can be issued with a temporary tender compliance certificate. Ms. Moore provides us with information on this type of tender compliance.
We have what is called a temporary tender compliance, which is issued to you once in a lifetime. This is when you are in a really desperate situation, meaning you need to get this tender compliance immediately and you do not have all your returns in order, or you have some taxes outstanding. We offer the temporary tender compliance, which lasts for 3 months, and that one costs $1,000. We expect that within this 3-month period that you would get yourself in order, meaning you get your returns up, you either pay off your taxes or you enter some sort of payment arrangement to get those taxes paid off. So this is once in a lifetime.
The standard and trusted trader compliance certificates are issued to an individual or company that is compliant with the tax laws and are valid for 1 year and 3 years respectively. The cost of a standard compliance is $2,500, while the trusted trader tender compliance costs $5,000. It must be noted that the process of obtaining a tender certificate of compliance from the GRA is a very simple one. The applicant will be required to submit a completed application form or a power of attorney if acting on behalf of another individual. These documents can be submitted to the Taxpayer Services Unit of the GRA located at its Camp Street, Georgetown headquarters or any of its integrated regional GRA offices across the country.
Before I go, let me remind you to visit our website at www.gra.gov.gy for more information. You can also send us an email at grapublicrelations@gmail.com.